So it's very much that time of year. Halloween, one of my favorite times of the year. And I always love to play certain specific video games to get myself in the mood. I kind of have like this long, ever-growing list of games I try to revisit whenever I can every couple of years during the Halloween time to really get in the spirit. Not necessarily all games that are horror games, but games that kind of just fit a specific spooky vibe that I'm looking for, you know? So I got a bunch of games I want to talk about today. Now, full disclosure, I did do this video last year, and the games I highlighted last year are probably like my tops. But this year I got some different picks, some recommendations from you guys. Just another excuse to talk about video games, because that's what I love doing here. Last year, just so you know, check out that video. I'll link it here somewhere and down here, because I'm very proud of that one still. But I did cover Legacy of Kain and some vampire games, Resident Evil 4 and 7 for specific reasons. Condemned, one of my all-time favorite games, Fable, Alan Wake, Until Dawn. But I got some cool stuff this year. The first thing I wanted to start off with is one that you probably didn't expect, but one that always comes to mind, and I always try and replay it one way or another. Maximo. This is like a classic PlayStation 2 game from, I believe, 2001, 2002. That was pretty damn incredible. It's a really simple, straightforward action hack and slashy type game, but it's actually a spin-off like in the Ghosts and Goblins universe, so it's got that vibe. If you know anything about Ghosts and Goblins, you know that you're getting a kind of spooky Halloween-esque adventure, and you totally get that here because you play as Maximo, who is like this brave, gallant, heroic knight, but you're running around and killing enemies in haunted graveyards and spooky forests and creepy castles and trap-filled dungeons and lava volcanoes, and zombies and skeleton warriors are literally popping up out of the ground, out of coffins, and that's how you fight them. You can stomp graves, you have cool finishing moves, and the game had a clever twist where it was actually pretty challenging for the time, but you had an armor system where Maximo would start off with a base layer of armor. You could pick up more armor to get even bulkier, but like every time you got hit, more armor would fall off of Maximo until he was completely vulnerable, just running around in his underwear in like heart boxers. It was super light. It had a lot of levity to it, but I would kind of chalk it up to something like, if you've never played it, if you were into something like Medieval, that type of vibe, that type of feeling, that type of environment design, aesthetic, tone, the whole thing, very similar. Maximo just had a really cool thing about it. Like, it was a little cheesy where it was like gallant knight, sorcerers, princesses and stuff, but really it was just the spooky enemy types. Some of the bosses, like one of the first bosses was kind of like a giant Frankenstein monster. You had ghouls in top hats, like I mentioned before, skeleton warriors, tons of good zombies, with some pretty memorable music. Some memorable music that's still stuck in my head today. Some of it a little more ambient, a little more chilled, but I think it was because I found the game so difficult when I was younger that I just kind of like replayed the same levels over and over and over again, so it's all just stuck up here. Can't remember what I had for breakfast or how to do math, but I can remember music perfectly from a video game from 2002. That's where we're at. So I do also want to talk about Resident Evil. Yep, once again, Jake talking about Resident Evil. Take a shot. Last time I highlighted specifically Resident Evil 4 for the crisp fall vibes, Resident Evil 7 for kind of like that going to a haunted attraction vibe, you know, where stuff's just jumping out at you at all times. I want to highlight the original Resident Evil because I don't talk about it a lot. The original Resident Evil is one that I do try and replay at least every other year, and I specifically around this time of year, just because it is still so damn spooky and eerie. Now, the first game, the original PlayStation game, eerie for a lot of reasons. The sound design, the limited graphics that kind of like, you know, lead to some vagary that just spooks you a little, to just the whole thing. But there's not many times where I think like a remake absolutely just 100% fully improves on the original, and the GameCube remake of Resident Evil definitely did. This has been ported and like up-resed, so you can play it basically anywhere if you never have before. I highly recommend it. It's the most un-Resident Evil of the Resident Evil games at this point. It's super low-key, but a perfect playthrough on a cold, spooky fall night, specifically because the whole thing, or most of the thing, takes place in a goddamn spooky haunted mansion. What could be better than that? If for some reason you've never played the original Resident Evil, but you love something like Luigi's Mansion, and you love slowly walking around the mansion looking for Mario, doing the whole thing, imagine being Jill Valentine or Chris Redfield, super cool action hero cop, slowly walking down haunted corridors waiting for something to jump out at you. The original Resident Evil and Luigi's Mansion have a lot in common. Not really, but I don't know why I'm saying that. But really, it's a special game for so many reasons. A lot of it to me is just so many iconic moments. The first, I've said this a lot of times, so stop me if you've heard this, but the appearance of basically the opening of that game, the trek, the cutscene, the whole setup of these attacks happening in Raccoon City Forest, to the actual run through the woods, to finding yourself in this mansion, to exploring some of it, finding a pool of blood, the ticking tock of the clock in the dining room, to getting up to that first zombie encounter is just so chilling. That whole thing, top to bottom, is perfect. I think it's a near perfect game, but that intro, that onboarding into the Resident Evil world is so incredible. And that imagery of that first zombie, so incredibly iconic. The original PS1 version of it, like maybe the way it's just like low res, like still spooks me out more, but it's still so perfect. And with the remake, what you get is just a meticulously designed mansion. I'm not even really talking too much about the zombies, which can be very scary, or any of the other creatures that, have been created by Umbrella, but really just the atmosphere and the feeling of walking around that mansion is unparalleled, especially if it's something you've never experienced before. I really wish I could go back and experience that for the first time, because after, you know how it is with certain games you've played a lot, you can kind of just run around it no problem. So some of the scare is still not there, but Resident Evil still manages to just every inch of the mansion is completely different, whether it's an unnerving camera angle or strange wallpaper or a completely different style of decor somewhere else. It is just a mansion filled with surprises, filled with windows overlooking just a mysterious, dreary, creepy dead forest, to the cemetery in the back, overlooking that creepy dead forest, to like the lightning, the crows. It's just perfect. It is perfect. Just like all those horror aesthetics, it is like a dream come true. That's what I wanted to highlight. I could spend a whole video talking about like the rest of the game, but really those are the things I kind of wanted to hit on. Now, the other thing I did want to touch on is one that a lot of you guys actually recommended in comments last year. It's Costume Quest. So I jumped into Costume Quest thanks to a lot of you guys for recommending it. Sounded cool, and yes, it is. It is absolutely, like, it is a literal Halloween game. And I think for that, it's perfect. Like Pumpkin Jack that I mentioned last year, this game is centered around the celebration of Halloween, specifically with how it's basically a kid game. It's centered around kids. Maybe if you're a kid at heart, which I certainly am. It's kind of like a simple little RPG where you explore a couple of environments as a little trick-or-treater, and you can collect different costumes. You walk around, like there's like a neighborhood level, there's like a mall level. They all have really good like kind of nighttime sound effects and music, and it's just really charming, but also just really done well. That neighborhood level specifically, and how you just walk around and get candy from stuff. It's like one of the collectibles in the game, but just the vibe of it, the fact that the trees are kind of covering the camera, the crickets chirping in the background, like it just gives you that neighborhood trick-or-treating vibe. That's really classic. But also the fact that it's made by Double Fine, so it's got tons of great quirks. The people behind stuff like most recently Psychonauts, but Tim Schafer, all that. Also the system, the battle system essentially is like you collect these costumes, right? And you wear different costumes. So say you're wearing like kind of like a little like quirky robot costume, and then when you get into a battle, it turns into like a actual RPG battle. It like loads into this arena, and it's kind of like playing on the kids' imagination, because in this world you're not like a kid dressed up like a robot. You're like this actual like giant Gundam robot. You know what I mean? Like it's just really, really smart with how they did it. I didn't get to play the DLC or anything like that, but shout out to you guys for recommending that to me last year. I did play it actually last year when I saw the comments. So now I'm mentioning it here for other people who maybe haven't been exposed to it. Consider it. One other kind of offbeat game I wanted to mention. This one is specifically not really around the spooky Halloween vibes, but the fall vibes, which I still think is very important. Like when I think about games I'm playing this time of year, I like the fall. I live in New York. I embrace the fall. I'm a pumpkin spice latte girl. Night in the Woods is a game that kind of captures a lot of that aesthetic. Now, this game, I'll say straight off the bat, is not for everyone for a couple of reasons. But what it essentially is kind of like a two-dimensional story game where you walk around and you talk to people. It's very much like a story-driven thing more than anything. It's got some simple gameplay elements, but that's really the gist. And while it's pretty cartoony on the surface, it's actually a pretty human and emotional and real story. Some of the dialogue, the way it's written, does kind of remind me of like annoying internet people. I don't like, you know what I mean? Just the way some people speak, but it works. I think ultimately it tells a pretty nuanced thing that I think some people can kind of read into a little differently. It's cool. But the other thing I really like about it is just what they built here. It's beautiful. It sounds cool and it looks great. It's super sharp. All the characters are critters. So it does kind of have that like cozy game vibe, that like chill out, lo-fi, cozy fall vibes thing to it. Like if you are into Stardew Valley in the fall or like a Harvest Moon type of thing, or like Animal Crossing and doing like the fall Halloween holiday events, like if you like that type of feeling, this game has that at the forefront, right? It's incredible for that visually, aesthetically. But the fact that they also crammed a very human and kind of very real story in there, I think is very remarkable and not common, and something worth experiencing if you're into that type of game. Now, one more I gotta highlight is a game near and dear to my heart. I'm gonna go back a little bit down memory lane and talk about The Darkness. The Darkness is absolutely awesome. It combines a lot of my favorite things, just those games from like the 2000s to things based on comic books, and then things that are gritty and spooky. The Darkness is all of that and then some, and it is really special. It's still definitely worth experiencing. So like, I don't want to spoil the whole thing necessarily, but it's a first-person shooter, like linear adventure. It's definitely not the best first-person shooter, but essentially what it is like you're like a New York Italian mob guy, Jackie Estacado, who, you know, is doing his thing until suddenly he's screwed over by his boss and killed, but he's awakened with this demon, this thing possessing him called the Darkness. And then the game becomes this adventure where you are still a first-person shootery man who also has tentacles coming out of him that can grab people and rip them apart and eat their hearts. And you can also summon these weird little goblin guys that help you out and do your bidding. All while you're on like a quest for revenge, but also a little bit of like the character coming of age, really some self-realization. There's a lot to it, and it is so much fun. It's gory, it's quirky, and it all kind of takes place at night in New York City and in some spookier places, actually, that I don't want to spoil, but it goes into kind of like a different, scarier place at a point that also is something that we don't see a lot in video games, just like the way it did it. But The Darkness is voiced by Mike Patton from Faith No More, so the creature just sounds downright incredible. So you're kind of like demon Doc Ock who dual wields pistols and worked for the mob. Like, it is just such a wild combination of things. Like, it's like a stew of really cool shit that I like, and it's cinematic, it's cool. Even the quieter parts are really interesting. So the game has you kind of navigating down to New York subway stations, and I gotta say, like, the subway station vibe they got in this game, even though the graphics aren't that great nowadays, like the vibe, they captured the vibe of like New York subway stations pretty well. A lot of games really haven't, so you gotta commend them for that. It's also it's also home to one of the greatest video game dialogue exchanges ever made.
So my suggestion is that you leave him alone and let him do his thing.
And if I don't?
Well, if you don't, I got a magic trick for you. I see you around here again, dipshit. I'll put my arm down your throat and pull a rabbit out your fucking ass.
And I think I'm going to end on that. The Darkness is just a spooky, incredible time. And with a moment like that, you have to play it if you've never played it. And if you have played it, that's a good reason to go revisit it. Now, I do think that this is a pretty good time for scary games. Just like looking forward as well, just wanted to give some honorable mentions, dude. The fact that Scorn is out pretty soon. That looks pretty creepy and gross. I will be talking about that in videos very, very soon, so keep your eyes peeled for that. But also, at the end of October, we're getting the Resident Evil Village update with the Rose DLC that I have so many story questions about that, not only just for the Winters family story, but also just Resident Evil. Like, what are we doing here? But also the fact that there's third-person mode being added, and I can have a new excuse to play through 8 like, or Village rather, in third person? Hell yeah. Also, Callisto Protocol in December, that is definitely one of my most anticipated games. That is, like I've been saying, just a video game. Straightforward, cool stuff that I want to play. It looks gory, it looks gross, it looks dark. I love sci-fi space horror specifically, Event Horizon ass shit, so I am in for that. And then we have the Dead Space remake right around the corner too. So like there is a lot, at least in terms of mainstream spooky horror Halloween type games. But there are plenty of other games to talk about. I know you have your own suggestions, so I want to hear yours down in the comments. I know I didn't get to touch on a lot of indie ones, but I haven't found too many that perfectly fit the vibe I'm going for. But like if you got some, definitely hit me up. Definitely let me know in the comments. Let me know what you like to play for the fall, Halloween season, what have you. It's fun to share. So let's talk. If you like what I'm trying to do here, like I said, I just talk about games and stuff that I love. Clicking the like button helps me. YouTube memberships and Patreon also helps me. Thank you guys for being here. I'm Jake Baldino. Subscribe because video games. Pizza's on me.